Hello everybody and welcome back to my sewing room. If you're new, my name is Diane and I like to share with you the stories of the quilts that I make. And this one, is called The Last of the Dinosaurs. So it's a nice little quilt for Project Linus. And it was scrappy, it was made up with little bits of fabric that I had left over. And so let me tell you the story of how this quilt came about. So I'm filming this video on the 13th of May, which is my granddaughter's birthday. So if you are watching this, happy birthday, Erin. And it's a sort of retrospective look at the quilts that I made over the last few months, because there came a time when I decided that I didn't want to make quilts anymore. And so I was in the process of finishing off projects that were on the go and sorting out my sewing room. And I knew that any larger pieces of fabric that I had, I would give to Project Linus. But I wanted to use up the smaller pieces of fabric in quilts for Project Linus. It didn't occur to me at the time to just bag up all the scraps and weigh them and sell them on somewhere like eBay, or even give them away, or Etsy, or whatever. It was in my sort of mindset that I had to use up these pieces of fabric in quilts. I don't know why, it just didn't occur to me not to. And so this little series, this is the third in the series that I've called Spring Clean, and this explains how my mindset was when I was in that period of clearing out my sewing room so I wouldn't quilt anymore. As you can see, I have got over that. There's a lovely quilt on the back wall that I am working on. I'm just deciding now how big to make it, what sort of outside border to put on that. So back to the dinosaur quilt. If you have seen series 2, you would have seen that I made the Dusky Rose quilt, because as I was in the cleaning process, I came across a plastic wallet in one of my drawers, and it had some 3-inch squares. Some were squares within squares and some were 3-inch squares, and I put those together and I made a quilt. Also in that same drawer there was another plastic wallet that had lots of smaller pieces of fabric with dinosaurs on. So there we go, there were just 14 pieces of dinosaur snippets, and I laid them out and decided that I might make some sort of pyramid or bar quilt with them. And then I looked in my fabric stash for fabric that would complement that brown, and I had this lovely orange with a sort of arced line in black on, and I thought that worked well. And then I remembered that I'd made the chevron quilt recently, and the backing of that was a black with an orange line on, and I thought that that would work really well with the quilt. And once I decided on using that black with the orange arced lining, I needed another colour that would lift that, because if it's for a younger child it still needs to be bright against the darks. And I had some of this lovely blue check, so I used some of that. You can see that in the pinwheels, and that complemented the bluey aqua coloured dinosaurs that I'd found. And I just made the first bar. As you can see, that was sort of the guide I was going for the width of the quilt. And below those dinosaurs on the top, you can see that there are some squares, and there are some squares within squares, and I found those in my 3-inch stashes of fabric, and they were all dinosaur related, so I put those together. So I'm thinking now that I would make some sort of bar quilt. And I had cut some of that lovely blue check into narrow strips for another project that I'd made, so I took those out and I cut some of the black with the orange arc, and I put those on each side of that blue strip, because I thought that would help fill in the gaps or fill in the lines where necessary, and it complemented those lovely pinwheels on the top. So I've just called those pinwheels lovely pinwheels, but at the time I was sort of numb really to the quilting design and the quilting process and the piecing process. It was just functional. I just wanted to put fabric together that I thought went well, and there was no sort of emotional attachment to it. I didn't think they were lovely as I was making them. It was just really finding fabric that would go the width that I decided on, and I was just going to keep going until there was a decent length. I mean, this quilt now, with all these lovely little details on, all these little bits of dinosaur and things, it is lovely. I've washed it, it's lovely and soft, and I feel a little bit guilty now for not paying due care and attention to it while I was making it. But anyway, I finished that first row and then I moved on to the next. And so you can see I'd used some of that 3-way strip beneath those pinwheels, and then I added a little bit of the darker fabric just to bring those squares up to the same length. Now below those 3-inch squares you can see I've added another strip of that blue, and to bring the design out level with those 3-inch squares I added little pinwheels on the side. I can't remember why I did that, because I had intended to put a little arrowhead on the end of that line to sort of make it the same length as those 3-inch squares, but I came in one day, must have, I can't remember, and I saw those big pinwheels and I made little pinwheels to go on the end of the line. I think it works okay. I would have preferred arrowheads on the end, but I didn't make those, so that's what we have. And on the bottom you can see I put all of those dinosaurs in a row. And once I joined those last strip of dinosaurs to the quilt, it wasn't quite long enough, and so I made some more pinwheels just to extend the quilt to put those on the bottom. And again I added the dark filler and spacers just to make it the correct length, and then I put a border around the whole of the quilt in that blue, and then I edged it in a brown strip, a brown border. I can't remember the dimensions. I'll add those to the bottom of the screen so you can sort of see what size it was. Not huge. And then I was turning to the backing, and so the intention for this quilt, the last of the dinosaurs, was to use up the last of all of the dinosaur fabric that I had in my Project Linus stash. And so I took some of the backing that I put together in a brushed cotton, really nice and soft, and of course that wasn't big enough. I'd only put those scraps together, and so I knew I needed to grow the backing. So the first thing I wanted to do was to add all of the rest of the bits of dinosaur fabric that I had, so I put those in the back. And so I think now all of the dinosaur fabric that I've got has been used up completely. I keep saying that about the bee fabric, but it's an odd bit that keeps on turning up. I found some more again the other day. I'll show you that at a later time, but only small pieces. But I think that there's no dinosaur fabric left now. And then I took that lovely orange that had the dark arc in that I had originally taken from my stash and put next to those pieces of dinosaur fabric, and I grew the backing until it was big enough to fit that top, and then also for me to do a self-binding quilt so that I could bring the binding from the back to the front. And that's what I did. So I'll give you now a little close-up of the dinosaur quilt when it was completely finished, and I put it on my design wall so that you could have a better look. And you can see the binding, I think, works really well, lifts the edge. It's a nice pop of colour on the edge of the quilt. I think you can just see these little scraps of dinosaur pieces that are on the back with the label, and it's really lovely and soft. It's all been quilted, it's been washed. So that's another one ready to go off to Project Linus. So like I said, when I was making this quilt, I was completely out of love with quilting, and I had made this little, well, I was working on this little cushion, and it was a kit form. Basically it was it's wool, and it's just like sewn by numbers. The backing of the top, all the colours coordinate with the wool that comes in the pack, and you just mindlessly do a half stitch across the whole thing. But that's what was occupying my time really when I was out of my sewing room, and it was quite an enjoyable experience. And I thought, well, perhaps that's where my hobbies will lie, because I used to do embroidery, you know, on fabric, not on a pre-thing like that, but I like them. I might do another one in fact. But yeah, so that is the story of the last of the dinosaurs, and like I say, I am in full swing now, back making quilts, and happy to do so. But there is a last series, series 4 of this spring clean, and that is the quilt that brought me back to quilting. And when you see it, you probably won't know why, because there's not a huge amount of design or anything required for it. But I really loved making this last quilt, and that brought back the joy. So I'll explain that to you next week. So if you are still with me, thank you for your company, and I will see you soon. Take good care of yourselves. Bye.